The maternity ward smelled of antiseptic and sleepless hope, a place where joy and fear coexisted in fragile balance. Nurses moved softly between rooms, monitors hummed, and somewhere down the hall a newborn cried with the fierce insistence of new life. On a narrow bed by the window, the young woman lay exhausted, her hair damp with sweat, her eyes rimmed red from hours of labor and days of quiet anxiety. She had given birth only hours earlier, and while the child slept in a clear plastic bassinet beside her, peace did not come easily. She knew who was coming. The door opened with sharp purpose, and her mother-in-law stepped in as if she owned the room. Her heels clicked against the linoleum, her posture stiff, her mouth already drawn into a line of disapproval. She did not look at the baby first. She looked at the young woman, assessing, judging, measuring her worth in a single cold glance. Without lowering her voice, she spoke words that sliced through the room like glass. She said the girl had embarrassed the family, that she had trapped her son, that she did not belong here. The hospital, she insisted, was not a place for drama, and the drama, in her mind, was the woman herself. The young mother tried to speak, but the words tangled in her throat. She had rehearsed 1,000 defenses in her head during lonely nights, but now they scattered like birds at the sound of a gunshot. She clutched the blanket, eyes flicking to the bassinet as if to protect the child with her gaze. The older woman continued, relentless, declaring that arrangements had been made, that it would be better if the girl left quietly. "You're rushing to the wrong station," she sneered, as if life were a train the young woman had boarded by mistake. A nurse hovered near the door, uncertain, trained to heal bodies but not families. The young woman's hands shook. She felt small, abandoned, as though the walls themselves were closing in. Then, without warning, another presence filled the room. The door opened again, but this time there was no sharpness, only a sudden shift in the air, like the pressure before a storm breaks. He was unexpected, unmistakable, and completely out of place in the sterile quiet of the ward. He did not raise his voice, yet the room fell silent. He greeted the nurse politely, glanced at the sleeping baby with genuine warmth, and then turned to the mother-in-law. His expression was calm, but his eyes carried a weight that suggested he had seen enough injustice in his life to recognize it instantly. He asked, simply, what was going on. The mother-in-law began to explain, her tone changing, softening into something almost performative, as if she sensed authority in him. She spoke of concern, of family reputation, of doing what was best. He listened without interruption, then nodded once. When he spoke, his words were measured and precise. He said that what was best was not control, not cruelty disguised as tradition, but care. He reminded her that a woman who had just given birth was vulnerable, that stress was dangerous, that love was not something to be rationed according to pride. The older woman tried to interrupt, but he continued, gently yet firmly. He spoke about responsibility, about how families fracture when power is mistaken for wisdom. He did not insult her, he did something far more unsettling. He saw her clearly. He named the fear beneath her anger, the insecurity behind her demands. With each sentence, her certainty eroded. The room, moments earlier filled with accusation, now held an uncomfortable truth. For the first time, the mother-in-law was silent. Her mouth opened, then closed. She looked around as if searching for allies, but found none. The nurse stood straighter. The young mother felt something loosen in her chest, a tightness she had carried for months easing just enough to breathe. The sudden guest turned to the young woman and asked how she felt. It was such a simple question, yet it nearly broke her. She answered honestly, her voice trembling but clear. She said she was tired, scared, and determined. She said she loved her child and wanted peace. He nodded, acknowledging her strength without turning it into spectacle. Outside that hospital room, the world was already buzzing with another confrontation, one that would soon dominate headlines and morning conversations. On the brightly lit set of a popular morning show, Tyler Perry sat across from Michael Strahan, the interview initially framed as a celebration of success and creativity. The smiles were there, the scripted warmth, but beneath it ran a current of tension that viewers could sense even before the words sharpened. The questions drifted from projects to personal responsibility, from inspiration to criticism, and then crossed an invisible line. The tone shifted. Perry's posture changed. He spoke about representation, about the burden placed on Black creators to perform gratitude while absorbing unfair scrutiny. Strahan pushed back, perhaps unaware of how his phrasing landed, perhaps constrained by the mechanics of live television. Perry did not explode. He explained. He articulated the exhaustion of being asked to justify one's existence in spaces that profit from it. The exchange grew heated, not loud, but intense, two strong personalities circling a point neither would surrender. When Perry finally stood up, removing his microphone with deliberate calm, it was not a tantrum but a boundary. He said he would not continue a conversation that reduced complex realities to sound bites. Then he walked off. The clip spread within minutes, dissected and debated. Some praised his refusal to play along, others criticized the disruption. But for many watching, especially those who had felt cornered in quieter rooms, it resonated deeply. It was the same moment, scaled differently, as the one in the maternity ward, the refusal to accept humiliation as the price of belonging. Back in the hospital, the sudden guest prepared to leave. He told the mother-in-law that she could choose to be part of this child's life with kindness or not at all, but that intimidation had no place here. He reminded her that silence could be a lesson, if she allowed it to be. She said nothing, gathered her purse, and left without another word. When the door closed, the room felt larger. The young mother looked at her sleeping baby, tears finally spilling, not from fear this time but relief. She was not alone. Somewhere between a hospital corridor and a television studio, the same truth echoed. Dignity is not negotiable, and sometimes the most powerful thing a person can do is stand up, or speak softly, or walk away. The night had settled heavily over the city, and the maternity ward glowed with muted light, suspended in a world that felt separate from time. Machines beeped softly, nurses whispered as they passed, and behind every closed door a family story was being rewritten. In one small room at the end of the corridor, a young woman lay awake, staring at the ceiling while her newborn slept nearby. Her body ached with the deep, unfamiliar pain of childbirth, but it was the weight in her chest that kept her eyes open. She knew peace would be brief, if it came at all. The door swung open without a knock, and the stillness shattered. Her mother-in-law entered with the confidence of someone accustomed to being obeyed. She did not pause to admire the baby or ask how the mother felt. Instead, she launched into a speech she had clearly rehearsed, her words sharp and unyielding. She spoke of shame and disappointment, of mistakes that could not be undone, of how the family's name had been dragged through whispers and judgment. Each sentence landed like a blow, striking a woman too exhausted to defend herself. The young mother tried to sit up, wincing as pain shot through her abdomen. She wanted to explain, to remind this woman that a child had been born, that something sacred had happened. But her voice failed her. The older woman took the silence as weakness and pressed on, saying it would be best if she left the hospital as soon as possible. Arrangements had been made, she claimed, and there was no place for the young woman in the future she envisioned for her son. "You're heading for the wrong station," she said coldly, as if life were a journey the young mother had boarded by mistake. Tears blurred the woman's vision. She looked at her baby, tiny fists curled in sleep, and felt a fierce protectiveness rise through the fear. This child was hers, whatever anyone else said. Still, the power imbalance was crushing. In that sterile room, stripped of allies, she felt abandoned not just by a family but by the promise that motherhood would bring respect. A nurse appeared at the doorway, drawn by the raised voice. She hesitated, unsure whether to intervene. Before she could speak, footsteps approached, steady and unhurried. Another figure entered the room, someone neither expected. His presence was calm, grounded, and immediately changed the atmosphere. He greeted everyone politely, then asked a simple question: why was there shouting in a place meant for healing? The mother-in-law bristled, then quickly rearranged her expression into something more composed. She spoke of concern and responsibility, of wanting to avoid scandal. The sudden guest listened without interruption, his face unreadable. When she finished, he turned his attention to the young mother, asking gently if she was all right. The kindness in his tone broke through the woman's composure, and she nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. The guest straightened and addressed the older woman, his voice calm but firm. He said that childbirth was not a moral debate but a medical and emotional trial, and that anyone who added stress in such a moment was doing harm. He spoke about dignity, about how families reveal their true values in moments of vulnerability. He did not raise his voice, but each word carried weight. The mother-in-law attempted to argue, then faltered. For the first time, she seemed unsure. Silence filled the room, thick and uncomfortable. The nurse stood by, quietly relieved that someone else had taken control. The mother-in-law's confidence drained away, replaced by shock. She had expected resistance, perhaps tears, but not this measured confrontation. Unable to respond, she gathered her things and left, the click of her heels fading down the corridor. Relief washed over the young mother in waves. She leaned back against the pillows, breathing deeply, feeling seen for the first time since the ordeal began. The guest offered a few reassuring words, reminding her that her strength did not need permission. He glanced once more at the sleeping baby, smiled, and then left as quietly as he had arrived. Far from that hospital, under the glare of studio lights, another tense exchange was unfolding, one that would soon echo across screens and social media feeds. On a popular morning show, Tyler Perry sat opposite Michael Strahan, the interview framed as a friendly conversation about success, creativity, and new projects. At first, everything followed the familiar rhythm of television banter. But as the discussion shifted, the questions grew sharper, probing into responsibility, influence, and criticism. Perry listened, his expression thoughtful, then began to respond with a candor that surprised the room. He spoke about the expectations placed on him, about the fine line between opportunity and exploitation, about how often Black creators are asked to defend their choices in ways others are not. The tension was palpable. Strahan challenged him, perhaps aiming for balance, perhaps unaware of how the exchange felt from the other side. The conversation intensified, no longer comfortably contained within the show's format. Perry's voice remained controlled, but the frustration beneath it was clear. He explained that there comes a point when dialogue stops being productive and starts being performative. When the pushback continued, he made a decision that would dominate headlines within hours. He stood up, removed his microphone, and calmly stated that he would not continue under those terms. Then he walked off the set. Viewers reacted instantly. Some praised his composure and conviction, seeing his exit as an act of self-respect. Others criticized the disruption, arguing that difficult conversations should be endured. But for many, especially those who had felt cornered in workplaces, families, or institutions, the moment resonated deeply. It was not about walking away from dialogue, but about refusing to be diminished by it. Back in the maternity ward, dawn began to creep through the window, painting the walls with soft light. The young mother stirred as her baby woke, crying softly. She gathered the child into her arms, feeling a sense of resolve settle within her. The confrontation with her mother-in-law had not magically solved everything, but it had shifted something fundamental. She understood now that she had the right to set boundaries, to demand respect, to protect herself and her child. In two very different spaces, the same lesson had unfolded. Whether in a private hospital room or on live television, there are moments when silence becomes complicity and endurance becomes harm. In those moments, strength takes different forms. Sometimes it speaks gently but firmly. Sometimes it stands up and leaves. And sometimes, in the quiet after the storm, it holds a newborn close and chooses a future defined not by fear, but by dignity.